Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Friday, October 3rd, 2025. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Trump says the U.S. is in an armed conflict with drug cartels. So President Trump has told Congress that he has decided the U.S. is in an armed conflict with drug cartels, signaling that he's planning to expand the U.S. military campaign in Latin America. And this was first reported by the New York Times. So in the memo, Trump cited his administration's steps to designate Latin American drug cartels as terrorist organizations, which he has used to justify the bombing of 3 boats in the Caribbean. His administration has provided no evidence to back up the claim that the 17 people who were killed, who were murdered in the strikes, were drug traffickers. Trump and his top officials have justified the extrajudicial executions at sea by framing attempts to bring drugs into the U.S. as attacks on the country. The president has pointed to the high number of overdose deaths in the United States, which are mainly caused by fentanyl and other opioids. But the U.S. military action has focused on Venezuela, which is just simply not a source of fentanyl. The vast majority of it comes from Mexico, and it doesn't need to go through Venezuela to get here. U.S. officials have made clear, as we've been covering, that there's another agenda at play here, and that is the push for regime change. So the notice to Congress says that Trump has determined that cartels involved in drug smuggling are non-state armed groups whose actions constitute an armed attack against the United States. So they're trying to claim bringing drugs into the country, these boats in the Caribbean, they weren't headed to the U.S. I guess they argue that the drugs were on their way to the U.S., but they claim that this is an armed attack on the United States. And essentially what they're trying to do here is create some sort of claim, justification for bombing boats, for blowing the boats out of the water and killing all the people on board, instead of interdicting them, boarding the boats, searching them for drugs. Which is, the standard operating procedure when it comes to stopping drug trafficking. And I know in one case, the U.S. military boarded a fishing boat off the coast of Venezuela recently, and they were on it for hours and they didn't find anything. So anyway, the memo states that the U.S. and the cartels are engaged in a non-international armed conflict using a term from international law. According to the International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC, a non-international armed conflict refers to conflicts in which one or more non-state actors are involved. It can refer to conflicts where non-state actors are fighting against each other or engaged in combat with a government. And a close look at the definition here, under international law, this claim that this is a non-international conflict, it just does not hold water. This is a very weak claim that they're making. So if you look at the definition of a non-international armed conflict, the ICRC says that the hostilities must reach a minimum level of intensity. This may be the case, for example, when the hostilities are of a collective character, or when the government is obliged to use military force against the insurgents instead of mere police forces. Obviously, that doesn't apply because there is no threat to life or anything to justify these strikes on these boats. They could have used police forces to board them. And then the ICRC also says that, again, to meet the threshold for this type of conflict, it says that non-governmental groups involved in the conflict must be considered as parties to the conflict, meaning that they possess organized armed forces. This means, for example, that these forces have to be under a certain command structure and have the capacity to sustain military operations. Well, the nature of the cartels and the gangs that the Trump administration has designated as terrorists is that they lack a command structure, that they are very decentralized organizations. And President Trump claimed that the first strike on a boat targeted members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua, which a U.S. intelligence assessment has described as loosely organized cells of localized individual criminal networks. That's the U.S. intelligence's description of this gang. The U.S. assessment also said that Tren de Aragua, their decentralized structure, makes it highly unlikely that they can coordinate large volumes of human trafficking or migrant smuggling. This assessment did not mention drug trafficking, and according to Insight Crime, which is a U.S. government-funded think tank that investigates organized crime in the Americas, according to them, Tren de Aragua is not considered a transnational drug trafficking organization. This think tank said, this was in August when they published this, when the Trump administration started these terror designations. They said that elements of the gang certainly engage in retail sale of narcotics, and that there have been sources talking about migrants and gang members carrying small amounts of drugs across borders in Latin America, but so far there are no cases of large cocaine shipments being linked to Tren de Aragua, especially not in connection with the U.S. market. So these claims just don't hold any water. I mean, we're being lied to. They're kind of just throwing all this at us, and we're being lied to in many different ways to justify this new military campaign. And of course, again, this military action against Venezuela, it's clear that they want regime change. They'll tell you that Maduro's the head of a cartel. That's their claim. But it's clear that this is, Marco Rubio's, dream project here, something that he's wanted for a long time. And legal experts have ripped the Trump administration's weak attempts to find a legal justification for these strikes. Jeffrey S. Korn, a retired judge advocate general lawyer who served as the U.S. Army's senior advisor for law of war issues, told the New York Times that drug cartels were not engaged in hostilities and that it was illegal for the U.S. military to target civilians who are not involved in armed attacks, even if they're suspected of criminal activity. And members of Congress on both sides of the aisle are also questioning the legal rationale for this campaign. According to a report from the Wall Street Journal, during a Senate Armed Services Committee briefing on Wednesday, senators pressed the Pentagon's top lawyer, Earl Matthews, who refused to provide a written justification for the strikes. Apparently, he was just saying, they're terrorists. We've declared them terrorists, so that means we can blow them up. So sorry if that was too much kind of technical stuff, but I think it's just important because there's just we're not seeing much opposition to this whole thing, and this really could blow up into something pretty major. If this turns into a full-blown war with Venezuela, or if they start bombing Mexico against the will of the Mexican government, that's another thing that's apparently on the table here. So as is usually the case when it comes to starting wars, they are lying to us. So the next one here, Venezuela says that it detected 5 U.S. fighter jets flying near its coast. So Venezuelan Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez said on Thursday that the Venezuelan military had detected 5 U.S. fighter jets flying near Venezuela's coast, a flight that comes amid reports that the U.S. is considering bombing the country. Padrino said, quote, Venezuela's integrated air defense system detected more than 5 aircraft with flight characteristics of 400 knots and flying at an altitude of 35,000 feet. And what does that indicate? These are combat aircraft that U.S. imperialism has dared to bring close to Venezuelan shores, end quote. So the U.S., these are likely F-35 fighter jets. The U.S. deployed them to the Caribbean recently, to Puerto Rico. As I mentioned, some background here with the bombings and everything, and the regime change being the real goal, as U.S. officials have made pretty clear here. And Padrino is warning the U.S. against attacking Venezuela, saying that they're ready for a national mobilization in response, saying that they're ready to fight. And Maduro has said this as well. All right, so the next one here, Israeli military kills dozens in southern Gaza. So the Israeli military killed at least 53 Palestinians in Gaza on Thursday, according to medical sources cited by the Palestinian news agency Wafa, including dozens in the south, where the IDF is ordering Gaza City residents to flee. Wafa reported that at least 29 bodies were brought to the Nasser hospital in the southern city of Khan Yunis, and according to the AP, at least 14 of them were killed in an area where the Israeli military frequently fires on Palestinians attempting to get food. The mass killing in southern Gaza comes a day after Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz said civilians in Gaza City had their last opportunity to flee before they will all be treated as terrorists and terror supporters. The IDF has been ordering evacuations from parts of Gaza City since early August, but never stopped bombing central and southern Gaza. This picture here are some of the people fleeing Gaza City. A large number of Palestinians were also killed in central Gaza on Thursday, with Wafa reporting at least 13 bodies brought to the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in Deir al-Balah. Among those killed were 4 brothers who were targeted while collecting firewood. So the slaughter continues. The destruction campaign in Gaza City continues, yet they continue these heavy bombardments and attacks in southern and central Gaza. All right, so the next one here, Israel captures U.S. citizens attempting to bring food into Gaza. So the Israeli military has stopped the Global Sumud flotilla from breaking its starvation blockade on the Gaza Strip and has arrested hundreds of activists who are on board the vessels, including American citizens attempting to bring food to starving Palestinians. According to a congressional letter that was sent to President Trump calling for the U.S. to guarantee safe passage for the flotilla, which was not signed by many members of Congress. It was like a handful of progressive Democrats in the House. It was led by Rashida Tlaib. But according to this letter, 24 U.S. citizens were part of the flotilla. One of them, a guy by the name of Greg Stoker, he's a contributor to Mint Press News, so he's a writer, and he makes, I think he's a podcaster as well. But he's a U.S. veteran, and he was participating in the flotilla, and he was putting out regular updates on his X account before he was captured by the IDF. And one of his last updates was at 2:50 a.m. Gaza time, early Thursday morning. Said the Israeli Navy was trying to spray them with skunk water and that they were still in international waters. So far, the U.S. government has been silent about these American citizens being taken into Israel. And I just saw on X, so they brought them to Israel, and I just saw a video of Ben-Gvir calling them terrorists, some of these activists who are arrested by the in IDF captivity, in Israeli captivity, and you have Ben-Gvir harassing them and calling them terrorists. I mean, I would be pretty terrified if I was in that group. And Israel saying that they're going to deport them, but they're going to be in spend some time in Israeli prison. But again, silence from the U.S. government, and we've seen other governments speak out. Ireland's prime minister said that the interception was a breach of international law because it happened in international waters. And the Irish government has said that at least 14 citizens, including a senator, have been detained by Israeli forces. Belgium's foreign minister said that the interception was unacceptable and said that he summoned the Israeli foreign minister to Belgium. He said, quote, "The manner in which they were boarded and the location in international waters are unacceptable, which is why I summoned the ambassador," end quote. There was protests in Brussels and Italy. There was protests all over in response to this. And the Israeli Foreign Ministry said that the Israeli Navy had captured 40 flotilla boats and was bringing them to Israel to deport them. And they published a video of Greta Thunberg being arrested. And there's a lot of other pictures. There's so much stuff on social media from, activists who are on the boats. And again, it's just that last thing I just saw. I just watched it right before I started recording. Just gave me a bad feeling. Ben-Gvir, finger wagging at them, and just not good. All right, so the next one here is Israel kills Doctors Without Borders staffer in Gaza. This one is from Kyle Anzalone. So Doctors Without Borders condemned Israel for killing an occupational therapist in Gaza. Israel has killed over 1,500 medical professionals in the Gaza Strip, including 14 Doctors Without Borders staffers. MSF said, quote, "An attack carried out by the Israeli forces in Gaza killed Doctors Without Borders occupational therapist Omar Hayek and seriously injured 4 other people. The attack took place on a street where our teams were waiting to take a bus to the MSF field hospital in Deir al-Balah. All staff were wearing MSF vests, clearly identifying themselves as medical humanitarian workers. Multiple healthcare workers, MSF family members, and MSF staff were also seriously injured in the attack this morning, including a physiotherapist, orthopedic surgeon, supply officer, and financial assistant. One of our staff members is in critical condition with shrapnel wounds," end quote. So they continue to kill and target healthcare and aid workers. All right, so the next one here, U.S. demands of Iran make another war likely. So the Trump administration is committed to ramping up the pressure on Iran, the Washington Post has reported, and the demands that the U.S. is making of Tehran to make another U.S.-Israeli war on the country more likely. According to the report, the U.S. is demanding that Iran accept 4 conditions as a baseline for negotiations, including committing to meaningful and direct talks, whatever that means. That's really rich for the U.S. to include that in the demand, considering they backed an attack on Iran during the last negotiations. They're also demanding that Iran end uranium enrichment. They want Iran to impose curbs on its ballistic missiles program, and they want Iran to cease funding of its allies in the region. Before the 12-day war, Iran made it clear that it would not end its uranium enrichment altogether, although it was willing to reduce its enrichment to much lower levels and was exploring the idea of an enrichment consortium involving other regional countries. That was what seemed to me like a workable deal that was on the table. The idea basically was there would be a enrichment facility in Iran, but it would also be operated by like the Saudis or the UAE and they were even considering, there was some talk of doing it in a different country, but Iran wanted to do it in Iran. But there was some talk of them doing it on one of their islands, in the Persian Gulf. And this seemed to be an idea that, this would have involved even more oversight. But they didn't get the chance to work out the details because they got bombed 2 days before they were supposed to hold the next round of negotiations with the U.S. And as I understand it, this was the discussion on the table was about this potential. But no, they said, we'll just bomb them instead. And then in the wake of the U.S.-Israeli bombing campaign, Iran has maintained that it will not give up its nuclear enrichment program, framing it as a matter of national pride. Iranian officials have also made clear they will never accept a deal that would impose limits on its ballistic missile program, since the weapons are the only real deterrent that Tehran has. I mean, that's the only way they can pose any kind of threat to, striking Israel or U.S. bases in the region. So they're not going to give up they're not going to put limits on their missiles. I mean, this is something the Ayatollah Khamenei said in one of his recent speeches. One of the reasons he said they're not going to give in on the uranium enrichment demand is because then there's going to be another thing. And then there's going to be another demand and another demand. So the fact that they're making all these demands of Iran when the mood in the country, and this is one thing Araghchi has said, the foreign minister, who he seems still way more open to diplomacy with the U.S. than other people in Iran. He's basically saying that nobody wants negotiations with the U.S. right now. Like the people, the government, within the government. And the fact that they're still making all these demands, imposing sanctions, they just had the snapback sanctions. The U.S. added some sanctions on top of that. I mean, we're just heading in the direction of war here. And you have Israeli officials threatening that an attack could happen soon. And you have the Iranian military saying that they're preparing for the attack. So things could get pretty bad here with Iran. All right, so the next one here, Israeli drone strike kills 2 civilian engineers in South Lebanon. So this one's from Jason Ditz. So an Israeli drone strike destroyed a car on the road between Jarmak and Kafr Rumen on Thursday, killing 2 engineers working for the private Mimar construction company. 1 other civilian was reported wounded in the attack. So again, this is southern Lebanon. And the evidence is that they were working for the construction company, and the Lebanese government is saying they were civilian workers. We have Israeli media claiming that they were Hezbollah members, tying it to a claim by the U.S. that this construction company had ties to Hezbollah. But it's clear that these are more. It seems pretty clear, at least, that these were more civilians that Israel has killed in South Lebanon since signing that so-called ceasefire deal back in November 2024. And as we covered yesterday, the UN said that it verified at least 103 civilians being killed in Lebanon by Israel since the ceasefire went into effect, which Israel just has simply not followed at all. So it seems like the number is now up to 105 based on this latest attack. And there was a Western diplomat quoted in the National, which I think the National is UAE media. But this Western official said that the ceasefire, that the Lebanon ceasefire was a ceasefire in name only, and that Israel essentially strikes wherever they want inside Lebanon, saying it was more of a de-escalation deal. Ceasefire in name only. Not exactly the message that you want to be spreading when you're trying to get Hamas to agree to this ceasefire deal that the U.S. and Israel have proposed. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. to back long-range missile strikes in Russia. So the U.S. will provide Ukraine with intelligence to carry out long-range missile strikes to target energy infrastructure inside Russia, and this was reported by the Wall Street Journal on Wednesday, and then a few other media outlets covered it as well. So the report said that President Trump recently signed off on the Pentagon providing such support for Ukraine and said that it's the first time the Trump administration will aid such Ukrainian strikes deep inside Russia, which always risks a major escalation from Moscow. I do believe that the U.S. has been supporting, I mean, it's clear they've been supporting Ukrainian attacks, drone attacks inside Russia to some extent. I'm sure they provided some intelligence for that. We don't exactly know, obviously, but as far as I can tell, since Trump came in, we haven't seen like the ATACMS missiles fired into Russia, and so this is sounding like that they're going to start doing that again. And last year, the Biden administration backed Ukrainian strikes inside Russia with the ATACMS, and the ATACMS have a range of up to 190 miles. And it's important for people to understand that in response to Biden backing those missile strikes in Russia, Russia altered its nuclear doctrine and lowered the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons. And one of the things that they added was that they now consider an attack by a non-nuclear armed state that's supported by a nuclear armed state as a joint attack. So under Russia's nuclear doctrine, they consider Ukrainian missile strikes that are aided by the U.S. as attacks by the U.S. on Russian territory, which is a little unsettling to think about. And then, so the news of Trump backing these long-range strikes comes as they are deliberating sending Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. The more, as the days have gone by, the less likely it seems. You know, I've talked about the stuff of the missile launchers, how are they going to send them? And I guess there are some possibilities, but there was a report in Reuters that cited some U.S. sources who said that the transfer of Tomahawks is unlikely. But they're in talks about providing Ukraine with other missiles, including Barracudas, which are air-launched missiles produced by Anduril, and other munitions that have a range of about 500 miles. So it says they're in talks on the Barracudas and potentially other missiles that have a similar range of over 500 miles, which would be much further than anything they've given Ukraine up to this point. As I covered, I said last month, I think actually, let me double check. I think this was in August. So the U.S. has approved a weapons deal for Ukraine that will provide the country with extended range attack munition, or ERAM, air-launched missiles, and they can hit targets up to 280 miles away. Some reports at the time said that they could be delivered within 6 weeks, but it's not really clear if that's realistic. So we don't know when Ukraine's actually going to get these missiles. But they're working on possibilities here, and the news of the U.S. backing these long-range strikes inside Russia come as President Trump has adopted the maximalist approach of his special envoy to Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, who insists Ukraine can win the war despite Russia having the clear advantage when it comes to manpower and industrial capacity to produce weapons. So, Trump has not ended the war in Ukraine, but one thing that he did was it seems like he's neutered the opposition to it in the United States, because under Biden, it was a lot of people on the right, Republicans, against the big escalations. And you don't really hear much out of them now that this is continuing and he's considering these big escalations. All right, so the next one here, Ukraine promotes neo-Nazi to brigadier general. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So Zelensky has promoted Colonel Andriy Beletsky to the rank of brigadier general. And Beletsky has some history here. He was the founder of the Azov regiment, the Azov battalion, and he's on record, as an outright white supremacist, based on Here, Kyle has it here. This is from a 2007 speech. I'll just read what he said here. And this is something that Scott Horton dug up, and this all this stuff is in his book Provoked. But this is a speech from Beletsky back in 2007. He said, quote, "Ukrainians are part and one of the largest and highest quality of the European white race. Ross, creator of great civilization, the highest human achievements, the historical mission of our nation in this turning point to lead the white peoples of the whole world into the last crusade for its existence against the Semitic-led Untermenschen." And the Untermenschen means subhumans, end quote. So that's who is now promoted to Brigadier General in the Ukrainian military. All right, so the next one here, the last story here, Larry Ellison vetted Rubio for fealty to Israel. So this article is from Dropsite News, from Ryan Grimm and Murtaza Hussein, and it's some emails. So this was from back in 2015 that Larry Ellison, he was emailing Ron Prosor, who was serving in the tail end of his time as the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations. He currently serves as the Israeli ambassador to Germany. So he's emailing an Israeli official saying, "Oh, I'm going to meet with Marco Rubio." And again, this is 2015 when he was, I guess he was running for president back then. Back when he was little Marco, and Trump said that he was going to be a puppet for Sheldon Adelson. Actually, no, I think he said that before 2015. I think that was a few years earlier. But anyway, so this is Ellison, the billionaire who owns Oracle, which is buying TikTok. What did he say? I forget exactly what he said, but he's emailing, again, Israeli official, and he says, "Oh, I had dinner with Rubio, and he was asked if he had the chance to talk about Israel." Prosor asked if he passed his scrutiny. Did you have a chance to talk about Israel? What did he say? And Ellison responded in the affirmative. He said, quote, "Hi, Ron. Great meeting with Marco Rubio. I set him up to meet with Tony Blair. Marco will be a great friend for Israel," end quote. And Ellison, the more you look into him, like just the more outrageously pro-Israel he is. And this is, again, who's getting control of the TikTok, who's securing the TikTok algorithm, as the White House put it. But that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints, one from Mitchell Plitnick. AIPAC's and Israel's influence is falling in Congress. One from Judge Napolitano, who will protect us from the protectors. One from Jonathan Cook, how the media tears up its own rulebook to hide Israel's atrocities. One from Jose Nino, is Spain tearing the NATO consensus? And our spotlight from Andrew Day, Bibi will sabotage Trump's Gaza plan. So please go check all that out. And, I think, what was it on Tuesday that Trump said Hamas has 3 or 4 days to reply? I guess that deadline is this weekend. I don't know. I'm always praying for a miracle when it comes to Gaza, but it's just hard to believe that, this is we're gonna see peace there. But we'll see what happens over the next couple days, and I hope everybody has a good weekend. Please like and subscribe and comment and follow us on all the social media. But anyway, I will be back in a few days. Thanks for listening.